Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of HRTechify, where we decode how to humanize the workplace. Today, we are unpacking a conversation we have all been a part of. I'm talking about performance review. If you are a professional, I'm sure you must have gone through performance review conversation at some point of time in your career. Now, it is for most of us, as an employee or even as a manager, most of us treat it as just another checkbox in a feedback cycle. But do you really think it is all about feedback, or is there something more to performance conversations? That is what we are going to talk today. And I will try from my own side, basis my understanding, how to, how to do the performance conversations in the right manner. Now, I would like you to take a moment and think back of a performance conversation which left you confused and unsure about how you truly performed or what was expected of you going forward. Think about it, take a pause, think for it for a while. Now, if you are done with that, now recall a different performance conversation where the manager actually gave you a clear, actionable feedback that helped you understand your strengths, identify your growth areas, and move ahead with confidence. Now, how did each of those conversations make you feel? What was the difference in the impact that you experienced in both the conversations? And while you are trying to compare the experience or the impact it had on you, let me share one of my own experience of one such performance conversation. So, thinking back to my time as a software engineer, there was this one performance conversation that really stuck with me because it left me completely confused. And I had actually, at that point of time, I had launched a critical project pilot and it had gone well. So I thought, what to be worried about from a performance conversation perspective. So naturally, I walked into the performance review feeling very pretty confident. I genuinely believed that I had done a solid job. And during the conversation also, my manager's tone seemed to match that, and it felt positive, almost affirming. And I walked out thinking, well, that's great. I'm on the right track. But here is where it got tricky. Later on, I came to know that my manager actually had concerns about the very same project. Now, none of that had surfaced in our discussion, not even a hint, and somehow the signals just did not land with me during the conversation. And because of that, that performance conversation still remains fresh in my memory. And that makes me realize that if performance conversations are not handled with clarity and intention, it can actually give a very different experience to the person. And as I reflect when I'm trying to record this podcast and at the same time trying to reflect on that particular performance conversation, and if I ask to myself, was that conversation inspiring at all? I would say it was not at all inspiring. But when I look up at the internet and try to find out was I the only one or how many people actually feel that their performance review conversations are not inspiring, the data is very interesting. Now, according to Gallup, only 14% of employees actually feel inspired by their performance reviews. Now, that is just 14% of all the employees who undergo performance review conversations. Now, this is a huge red flag. So, does that mean that performance conversations or performance reviews are inherently flawed? They're not needed? No, I don't intend to do that, or I have no intention on asking the validity of performance conversations. What I'm trying to ask here is that the question that we should be looking at is how can we make performance conversations more meaningful, clearer, and genuinely impactful? And if you ask me, here is what I have learned from my leaders. A meaningful performance conversation goes far beyond a checklist of wins and misses. It is all about connection, clarity, and future growth. And I've seen many leaders nail performance conversations by doing these four things really, really well. So, number one, they always start with a purpose and not paperwork. Now, performance conversations aren't about just forms or ratings, they are also about growth. I have often seen, effective managers starting with something simple yet powerful. And, I've heard them saying things like, let's talk about how this past period has felt for you. What has actually gone well, or what has felt like a stretch for you? This question actually sets the tone, not of judgment, but of reflection. And it helps in bringing out the best during the conversation because it opens the door for the other person to be honest and not defensive. The number two thing which I've seen effective managers making performance conversations impactful is that they make it a dialogue and do not make it a monologue. Now, it's very important to understand that while as a manager, it is you who is giving a feedback or an input or a recommendation, you also need to invite the other person into the conversation and therefore make sure that it's a dialogue. Because it's not just about sermonizing of how the year went for you. It's also about reflecting together, sharing your perspectives and aligning the expectations. This, if you are doing this in a conversation, it allows for the conversation to be engaging and more productive. It also allows, to help you create that room for the other person to ask open-ended questions. And if you are a people manager listening to this, I would say that, if in case you have not been making your performance conversations a two-way dialogue, start doing it today. You can do it by initiating very simple but thoughtful questions like, what achievement are you most proud of? Or what was the most challenging task you faced this past year? Where did you feel stuck or unsupported? Things like that. And when you hear back the responses to these questions, I'm sure you will be getting inputs and insights which will be far more richer than what you could actually get it from a KPI or from a dashboard. The number three thing which I have seen leaders doing consistently is that they talk about the future more than the past. Now, it's important to reflect a bit on the past, but also spend most of the time on what is next. So the leaders or managers actually talk about what are the skills to build, roles to explore, projects to stretch into, areas to improve. Because, once you start doing these things in your performance conversation with the employee, this allows you to take the conversation beyond evaluation. The number four thing, which is my personal favorite one, is that a lot of managers have started ditching the sandwich method. Now, for those of you who don't know the sandwich method, it is all about saying something nice, dropping the critique, and then ending with a praise. It's a very old trick most managers have been trying to adopt, where they try to, wrap criticism between two different compliments so that it sounds nice. However, in the hindsight, I personally believe that it ends up with people being more confused than clear. And knowing my own personality, if I was the employee, I would rather opt for getting clarity than nicety. And it's not difficult. You can still be clear and nice in your communication by just being direct and compassionate. And that is very important because it's important to send the right message to the person which will enable them to grow in the coming time. That should be the intent. And how have I seen the managers doing this? Or if I have to go back into a conversation as a manager, which I have not yet done so far, I think one of the most important questions for managers before entering a performance conversation could be, are you there in the conversation to help the person grow, or are you there only to evaluate the person? If you ask this question, it will trigger a mindset shift in how you are going to drive the conversation. Because, what I've felt is that most people don't fear feedback. They fear being misunderstood or judged unfairly. So, if you are going to go with a mindset of trying to enable the other person grow, you will drive a conversation in a very different manner. Try it for yourself. Let me know how did you experience, or if you are an employee, see if your manager is following these 4 basic rules during the conversation and tell how did you experience that conversation. That's it for today. You are listening to HRTechify, where we humanize the workplace one byte at a time. For more insights like this, be sure to follow, share and subscribe.